What did Pan-Asianism attempt to accomplish? What do they want to do? You don't know? Okay, this group right here. Yeah.
To liberate the Asian region from Western industrialization.
Right on. Yeah. Liberate from Western imperialism. How does it contradict itself? They're liberating them from one empire. How do they contradict themselves? Or just adding another empire, right? Contradict itself by replacing West with Japan. And it's even more ironic, we're going to see here on the slide, because Meiji Restoration, in that process, Japan kind of adopts a lot of Western ideals, a lot of Western tactics in government and their empire growing. So really all they're changing is the name of the empire that Asia is going to be under, right? If they're adopting, so let's read here. During the Meiji Restoration, 1868 to 1912, the Japanese studied the political, economic, and social institutions of the Western powers and selectively adopted certain institutions to meet their needs. So they're wanting to liberate, it looks good on paper, right? Oh, we're going to kick out the West, there's this Asian brotherhood that we want to maintain, and we're going to become a global power. Because right now, they're just being made a fool of. And all they're doing is switching the name, right? They're just switching, all right, we're taking out the West, we're going to adopt certain institutions that they believe in, we're going to adopt some ideals, and then we're just going to slap the name of Japan on it, and boom, it's ours, right? So, for example, they modeled their constitution and government after Western European ones, but gave their emperor more power than European kings had in their limited monarchies. They also elevated the status of merchants, a class that had been looked down upon in Japanese society, but was respected in the West. A national military and universal conscription was established, right? So conscription is like the draft, right? Making their citizens fight. And compulsory public education was introduced, both to teach the skills needed for the new nation and to teach values of citizenship in all Japanese citizens. Most importantly, the Japanese industrialized during the Meiji Restoration and experienced many of the same effects that England had earlier in the century. Right, cities were growing at a massive rate. Remember, when we were studying for the final, we kind of went over, like Manchester as an example, right? A big English city. They grew like 10 times its size during industrialization. So this same thing is happening in Japan. Cities grew as more Japanese moved from farming into jobs in factories and offices. And the countryside's larger landlords came to own more and more land, and number of poor tenants increased. And then another thing that you're going to see, how they differ is England had a lot more resources, right? They've already imperialized. They're colonizing all over the earth. They've got a colony in India. They've got South Africa. They've got all over Africa. I mean, they had their North American colonies for a while. Japan doesn't have that. They are super behind. They're still on their island out in the Pacific, haven't really reached out yet. So, unlike England, who had an abundance of coal and other natural resources necessary for industrialization, Japan had very few of these raw materials. Instead, the Japanese traded for raw materials to fuel their factories and make their products. In the 1920s, for example, the Japanese traded goods like steel and silk stockings, which were very important in the United States, or very popular in the United States, for raw materials such as like raw cotton, wool, timber, phosphate, coal, iron. There's a huge list, so this is just super summarized. And then the strategy for trading for natural resources worked well for Japan until the Great Depression hit in 1929. Why do you think it would hit a hard slump as soon as the Great Depression happened? Global trade, especially in Japan. We haven't talked about Great Depression yet, but just assuming what the Great Depression is, yeah.
Because it sounds like they were trading a lot of luxury items, which wouldn't exactly go well with the Great Depression.
Yeah, people couldn't afford luxury items. It became more of, can you afford survival items, right? Can you make ends meet? Do you have enough money to even get food to live, right? And another thing is that Great Depression, people are stockpiling and hoarding their stuff because people can't afford necessarily to import or export certain goods, right? You guys will see, your next class, we're going to go over kind of a bunch of different countries and the effect of the Great Depression on them. And you'll see in Australia, there was this crazy war directly correlated to the Great Depression. And it wasn't even a war with another country. They had a war with animals in their own nation. So, it's the Emu Wars. So, a little sneak peek. But, yeah. Real quick, let's go over this timeline. If you want to write it in your notes, right up to here's where we're going to stop. So, we're going to go over, like we just did, the Meiji Restoration, 1868 to 1912. Then you have 1894, you've got the Japanese winning in the Sino-Japanese War, the first one. You had the Japanese winning in the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 05. We kind of touched on that in Russian revolutions, right? How they were super embarrassed because they just lost to Japan, like a complete underdog. And we'll end it roughly with the Treaty of Versailles. Comes up all the time. You guys are going to see it for a long time because it's very important. Honestly, like, in one of my college classes, we had to kind of rank at the end of semester, like, 10 most influential moments in human history for us. And this is, like, top 5 usually for just about everyone. Treaty of Versailles was huge. That will always be recurring. But we'll go over the Treaty of Versailles and how Japan was able to take advantage of that. That'll be up there for the next couple slides, so feel free to write those down. First, Sino-Japanese War. Sino meaning China. If you see Sino in anything, it means China. It was basically just the European term for China. I don't know exactly where the translation came from. But you've got China versus Japan. It was fought over the control of Korea and that Korean peninsula. All of Asian history for the last 500 years, there was a tributary system where either China or Japan was like the big brother of Korea. There was Japan on their island. There was big continental China right there. And Korea just had that sliver on that peninsula. They kind of take turns over a couple hundred years of who controls Korea, right? They have their own leader. They have their own this. They have their own that. But for a majority of the time, China had control of the Korean peninsula. They had control of Korea. And that was pretty big for Japan, right? They didn't get to have a chunk of land on continental Asia. So you've got them fighting over that Korean peninsula. Japan fought for economic and strategic interests. What might be an economic interest to having the Korean peninsula if you're Japan? Trade, right on. Because what invention through the Industrial Revolution helps trade? Steam engine, right? You got railroads now. So now Japan, who had entirely had to worry about shipping their goods through boats because they're on their island, now they have a stepping stone into continental Asia. If they get Korea, they have a railroad that they can run all the way to other parts of Asia, to Russia, to Europe. Now it just made shipping goods way easier for them and cost effective. What about strategic interests? Let's think like war. Like, why might having a chunk of land on continental Asia be an advantage? Is it easy to invade a country if you have to go to their coastline every time? No. Why? Why might it be pretty hard to be attacking from an island constantly?
Because they can just defend really heavily right where you're coming from.
Right. Oh, they just have to defend the coastline. Boats can come in and come out. As long as they keep troops from getting on the ground and taking a foothold, like you see in World War II, we'll talk about D-Day, an invasion like that, pretty hard, right? Attacking from the sea constantly. They might take out boats. You have to build more boats. Having control of Korea will give them these ports, and it will give them a foothold in Asia for control. Now they have boots on the ground. Now they can be readily, they can be ready for a war with China if they need to. They don't have to wait and ship people over. As China fought for continued influence over the region, right, through that tributary system, resulted in Japanese victory over the Chinese. They swept them. Wasn't even close. It was really bad. And the control over the Korean peninsula. This war also shows the weakness of the Chinese empire. China in Asia was the top dog, and now they're starting to decline. There's a lot of unrest, a lot of change in leaders, not so centralized. You've got warlords all over the place. They're kind of in shambles. So Japan takes advantage of that. They win the first Sino-Japanese War. They get control of the Korean peninsula. And now you see the decline of the Chinese empire and the gradual growth of the Japanese empire. Next, this should be a little review. Maybe we understood what the result was, but The Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, Russia versus Japan. You got both nations favoring control of Manchuria. Manchuria is about, you'll see on a map in the next slide or so, it is a chunk of land in continental Asia, like northeast of China, right above Korea, right under Russia, right next to China. Huge chunk of land. Both Russia and Japan need this land, right? Japan is just trying to, they are trying to get more land in Asia. They need more resources. They need more land, industrialized. You got more land, you got more resources, you got more goods, you got more stuff you can make. That's money and that's military, right? Everyone's building up their military. You saw that in like the main acronym for World War One, right? You've got imperialism and you've got militarism. I mean, those are key factors in this early 1900s, like up until World War II, really. But so you've got Japan thinking that through China's surrender in the Sino-Japanese War, they'd get Manchuria, right? It's right next to them. China has control over Manchuria, but before that could happen, China gave a 25-year lease to Russia over Manchuria. Basically like I'm going to dish off this piece of land. They're going to beat me. I'll come back in 25 years. I'll pay you back for it. It's yours right now. Kind of ensuring like, oh, maybe they won't attack Russia. Russia's a huge, they're the big bear, right? They've been this big empire for hundreds of years. But no, they both want Manchuria. And so Japan thought they were owed this land through beating China. Russia thought otherwise, and at the time, they were backed by France and Germany, and they got that lease on the land from China. Naturally, this started a rivalry over the land, which resulted in Russian and Japanese war. The war resulted in Russian defeat and Japanese maintaining control over Korea and gaining much of South Manchuria. So now they've got even more land, they've got even more goods, even more resources. Now they're able to ship more stuff, make more money, control more land, militarize, right? Building up their empire. Imperial Russia is embarrassed. You remember, like, Tsar Nicholas was super embarrassed. They lost. Now the people are like, we trust this guy. We keep losing. I guess we'll go to this great war, World War I. Maybe that things will change. We saw, didn't. Imperial Russia is embarrassed, and Imperial Japan slowly grows into the role of a global power. So real quick, just to summarize it, Sino-Japanese War, Japan won. What did they get? Someone just shouted out. What did they win?
Land.
What piece of land?
Korea.
Korea, right? Korea. It's the peninsula. It's called Korea. Russo-Japanese War. What did they win?
Manchuria.
Manchuria. South Manchuria. Oh my. And maintain Korea. Right? They're gaining more land every time. Plus land, which means plus resources. Plus land, which means plus resources. Maintain Korea. And finally, in this phase of just going over review, World War I happens. We know this, 1914. The British asked Japan to help take control, or to help take care of the German Navy in the Pacific. Germany has a bunch of islands in the Pacific right now, right? Imperialism all over the land. All countries are all over the world trying to take out these islands, take out all these places for resources, and just to have bases across the world, right? You don't have to start your army in Germany and work your way over. If there's a conflict over there, you want a peace in, you've got guys in there already, right? So Japan sent an ultimatum to Germany. We know what an ultimatum is? Real quick, someone just give a choice. Right, and the choice is, it's this or nothing, right? It's as strict as a choice can get. It's either like this ultimatum, right? That you do this or we're gonna fight. Germany didn't even answer the ultimatum, so it resulted in Japan joining the war. And by the end of the war, Japan was able to use the Treaty of Versailles to gain two things, right? They conquered those German islands in a chunk of land that Germany had in continental Asia. They claimed the islands of the Marianas, the Carolines, and the Marshall Islands. You're going to see these islands named in World War II, because obviously we know Japan is in World War II. And if you know anything about World War II and U.S. involvement, you'll know island hopping, and they're going to hop through these islands, right? People are going to be fighting in these islands actively in World War II. And they're finally recognized as a major nation by the West. So real quick, So I'm gonna just recite those two lines to me. We got Versailles for Japan. What do they gain?
Recognizing the major nation of the West.
Major nation status. Someone else. What's the other one? Listed on the board. Number 1. They got islands, yeah.
They claim German territory.
German territory. What were the territories?
Marianas, Carolines, and Marshall Islands.
Marianas, Carolines, Marshall Islands. Awesome. Yeah. This, more land, means more resources, means more control. Japan is expanding their empire, and now by the West, they're actually officially recognized as like this big power, right? They beat China, 100, maybe even 1,000-year rivalry really between the two. They beat Russia, who's a top dog in the world as a global power. Now they took out Germany with the help of the Allies. They were able to win pieces of land through the Treaty of Versailles and major nation status. You'll see a lot of the time, and it even happens today, in recent history, where a small country might not be recognized, its capital might not be recognized by other major nations. Like, there's been a lot of dispute on the capital of Israel or Palestine in recent years, whether it's for Israel it's either Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, right? And only top dog countries are firmly going to say oh, that's the capital because we recognize it that way. So it might not matter to everyone else, right? And this is even more so back then. The West is finally yeah, okay, Japan is on even playing field, right? They're taking over a lot of land. They're getting all these resources just like us. This is what we've been doing for 150 years at this point, right? Even longer for most countries. So yeah, they are able to gain land and resources through the Treaty of Versailles from Germany. Because what do we remember about the Treaty of Versailles for Germany?
They had to give up a bunch of stuff and they were going for the war.
Yeah, they gave up everything. Their military, money, they had to pay reparations. This ultimately, the next class I have with you guys, you'll see how much it just tanked for Germany and their economy. But yeah, so we're going to get into okay, yeah. So here's a map that better shows it. It's kind of choppy, but it's all right. So you got Japan. This is where they start. You got this Korean peninsula right here, and this is Manchuria right here, right? Huge chunk of land right there. China right here, next to Mongolia, underneath Russia, and you got all these islands out here. That Sino-Japanese War, right? When they take over Korea, they're taking over this peninsula, this chunk of land. They beat Russia, they take over South Manchuria, and a lot of that land. And then through Versailles, that's when they're getting all these islands out here. And then later, you'll see, we'll go over it later, but they start taking over French Indochina, which is modern day Vietnam, Cambodia. That'll play a huge factor in the Vietnam War. Right, you have Vietnam versus the U.S. But you'll get into that later. I think it'll be U.S. history. But this plays a huge role. Right now, what Japan's doing plays a huge role in World War II. Cold War, honestly, with China and how, people start teaming up. They're I don't really like Japan. They're doing what we did, but we only like it when we do it, right? It's only cool when the U.S. and other nations exploit, and all these European powers exploit land. But when Japan does it, that's land that we don't get. So, not cool. But yeah, through the Japanese territorial growth after World War I, you get more resources, more trading ports and land access, and enhanced borders, right? They don't have to stay on their island and wait for conflict and then ship over. Now they've got boots on the ground actively in places where if there's conflict, they can just get up and get after it. So, real quick, I'm going to pass around some whiteboards and markers and stuff. It'll be one per table group. And what we're going to do is you guys are going to go over each of the following questions. You're going to go over each of the following questions and figure them all out, and then one question at a time. So don't write all 5 questions, the answers to all of them on the whiteboard. We'll do one at a time. If you write small, I can't read. I have such bad eyesight. So make sure to just do it one at a time. And we'll go over them each and write down the answers to these questions in your notes. because these are like the most important part of your notes. And we'll do this for about, let's go 10 minutes.